Today is the third Sunday in a row that we find ourselves in the Sermon on the Mount. Once again, we pick up where we left off. Remember that in Matthew, the sermon functions as Jesus' manifesto, in which he declares his interpretation of the law and describes its implications for the community who would gather around his teaching. Jesus' audience is the disinherited and the disenfranchised. Here, among the dispirited and the poor, the exploited and forgotten, Jesus names the presence of God's blessing and points to himself as the fulfillment of the promises that he offers. Jesus sees them, he calls them blessed, affirms their dignity, and promises to be their consolation as they live salty and light-filled lives. Through Jesus, God gathers them as a people, a community called into existence as a sign and symbol of God's intentions, purposes, and desires for the life of the world. This is exemplified in Jesus' ministry to the crowds just before he begins his sermon. Matthew tells us that Jesus cured every sickness and every disease, healed those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains, people possessed by demons or having epilepsy or afflicted with paralysis. In each of these examples, Matthew begins to outline the contours of the good news of God's reign that Jesus came to proclaim. And the good news is that the inbreaking of God's kingdom means a liberation from the shackles and effects of poverty. It means a restoration to community for those isolated by social stigma and religious impurity. It means a subversion of the social, political, and economic status quo, a redrawing of the boundaries of God's people to not only include the disinherited and the disenfranchised, but to center them in our embodiment of holiness. Our passage today begins the section of the sermon that commentators often call the antitheses, a series of statements that are intended to reject the old order and replace it with the new. This kind of thinking has been used to undergird and justify the various manifestations of anti-Semitism that stain our history, and it should be rejected. Neither Jesus nor Matthew intended to reject the law or somehow suggest that Christians have superseded Jews as God's people. Nor is the purpose of these sayings to lay out some kind of cosmic rule book by which we earn righteousness and avoid punishment. There is no transactional formula in this sermon. No quid pro quo contract that obligates God to love us and care for us and spare us from judgment and damnation if only we will fill in the blank. When holiness is understood as transactional, when receiving God's love and care and protection is understood as something that we earn, if we do the right things, if we say the right things, vote the right way, pray the right way, refrain from the right things, when we understand holiness and righteousness in this way, we make them a status that must be achieved. In the good news of the kingdom, if the good news of the kingdom is oriented toward life abundant, then these ways of interpreting Jesus' words miss the point. The kind of holiness and righteousness that Jesus outlines in the sermon is undergirded by justice and liberation, by restoration and by wholeness. And he bases this understanding on his interpretation of the law and the prophets. So when Jesus speaks about fulfilling the law and the prophets, he means to describe how in his life and in the life of the community constituted through him, the law and the prophets are brought to full expression in everyday life. In this sense, Jesus doesn't dispense with the old, but deepens it. He contextualizes it in a continuum of relational holiness. With each example that he offers, Jesus declares that our relationship with and to God is manifest in our relationship with and to one another. This suggests also that the difficult teachings that we find in the sermon are not meant to expose human failure or inadequacy. It's not intent on beating us to our knees in repentance. Jesus is not trying to dupe us or to shame us. He is pointing toward a new way of life, one that practices restorative justice rather than retaliation, mutual care instead of self-centeredness, abundance rather than scarcity. In doing so, Jesus locates the inbreaking of the kingdom in the embodied reality of the reconciled community. His sermon is meant to inspire our imaginations, to envision a kind of life that is more than, to see what is impossible made possible by the presence of God's blessing. Can we imagine a kind of community where peace is more than the absence of retaliation? Can we imagine a peace born out of justice and restoration? Can we imagine a kind of fidelity that is more than the absence of sexual impropriety? Can we imagine a fidelity that embodies mutuality, compassion, and forgiveness? Can we imagine a mutuality that extends beyond the social contract? Can we imagine a mutuality that honors the face of God in one another, that rejects the false pretenses of autonomy and recognizes the contingency of our identities upon one another? Can we imagine a kind of community in which truth-telling is the norm, in which reconciliation rather than retaliation is the impetus for relationship, in which compassion rather than judgment is the default posture? Far from being a mere exercise in thought, Jesus' intent to inspire our imagination is meant to inspire our living into the vision of community that he describes. At the very end of his sermon, 2 chapters later, from where we find ourselves in the gospel this morning, Jesus compares those who hear his words and act on them to a wise person who builds a house on a solid foundation rather than a fool who builds on sand. In other words, whatever it is that we glean from Jesus' teaching is nothing more than shifting sand unless we embody it in our lives. I wonder, dear people of grace, how do we embody reconciliation? What traumas of our past still need to be healed? What parts of our community need to be restored to our common life? From what shackles do we need to be liberated so that we can fully embrace the face of God in one another and in ourselves? To whom do we need to offer forgiveness, and from whom do we need to receive it? Jesus' concern with this sermon has nothing to do with giving us a to-do list or a list of do's and don'ts with a threat of punishment. Rather, Jesus wants to invite us into a life that is more than, to orient our common life toward more than the bare minimum of civility, to embrace more than a modicum of compassion and trust. What Jesus offers is more than just life. It is life abundant. Today, I pray that God's Spirit empowers us and God's grace sustain us as we learn how to live into the vision of beloved community that Jesus casts in his sermon. Amen.